Hello and welcome to News World on Channel News Asia. I'm Glenda Chong. First, the headlines. Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah guerrillas head for a showdown. Both sides pledge to continue offensives against each other as Israel hits out at guerrilla targets in Lebanon in retaliation for the killing of 7 Israelis. Nigeria has its first elected civilian president in 15 years, but it doesn't look like a smooth win for former General Olusegun Obasanjo. His defeated rival has vowed to contest the results. And U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright meets Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji. On the agenda, China's financial and economic system and human rights. Israel has bombed guerrilla targets deep inside Lebanon in its most intensive attack on the country in 2 years. The bombings were in retaliation for the killing of 7 Israelis, including a high-ranking general by the Shiite Muslim group Hezbollah. Israel invaded parts of southern Lebanon 14 years ago in a bid to protect its northern territory from cross-border attacks. However, as Israelis brace themselves for more Lebanese counterattacks, many are once again questioning the effectiveness of the occupation.
Missiles rained down on suspected Hezbollah Shiite resistance positions in southeastern Lebanon for a second day. As yet, however, there's no word on casualties resulting from the attacks, which raised to 21 the number of Israeli air raids this year. And Prime Minister Netanyahu argued yesterday that he had no choice but to order the latest attacks.
We have no desire whatsoever to escalate in Lebanon, but neither can we sit aside and accept these criminal attacks on our towns and villages in the north of our country.
There was a certain inevitability about the raids after the death of 38-year-old Brigadier General Eretz Gerstein and 3 other Israelis. Gerstein was the most senior military casualty suffered by Israel since its invasion of Lebanon. And now the Israelis and Lebanese who are living on the border of the two countries are once again bracing themselves for a familiar series of attacks and counterattacks. If the Hezbollah do strike back with a Katyusha rocket attack on northern Israel, Tel Aviv has warned that it will respond with a massive military attack, as it did in 1996 during its Grapes of Wrath offensive, which left 200 dead and thousands homeless. The latest escalation of tension comes after a series of military setbacks for Israel in Lebanon, which has renewed an impassioned debate amongst Israelis about their occupation of the neighboring territory. And it's an issue that looks set to influence the outcome of the May 17th Israeli general election. Opposition leader Ehud Barak has urged Israel to find a political solution to the conflict. However, reports this evening from Tel Aviv suggest Prime Minister Netanyahu is prepared to keep up the military assault on Hezbollah forces for now.
Iraqi officials say the Iraqi-Turkey oil pipeline has become the latest casualty of U.S. airstrikes. Baghdad claims half its crude oil exports have halted after the pipeline was hit in an attack. The Iraqi-Turkey pipeline runs from the northern Iraqi field of Kirkuk to the South Turkish port of Ceyhan and plays a crucial role in Iraq's oil production capabilities. Iraq says U.S. planes hit the pipeline overnight, killing at least 3 people in the process.
The attack resulted in inflicted severe damage to the facilities of the station. The pumping has not been recommenced till this moment.
But the U.S. government denies its airstrikes have done damage to the pipeline. A Pentagon spokesman said they were still in the process of assessing what damage was caused by Sunday's bombing, but stressed that the pipeline had not been a target. U.S. and British planes continue to patrol the northern and southern no-fly zones over Iraq and periodically shoot at any sign of violations from Iraq. But Iraqi Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan remains resolute, saying Baghdad would continue to defy the no-fly zones. Nigeria has elected its first civilian president in 15 years. Former General Olusegun Obasanjo won a crushing victory over his opponent, former Finance Minister Olufalaye. However, the defeated candidate has rejected the result, alleging massive vote rigging, and he's planning to go to the law courts to prevent Mr. Obasanjo from taking office.
The results didn't come as a surprise. Retired General Obasanjo had been leading in the polls throughout the campaigning period. In the end, he received 18.73 million, or just over 63% of the votes, against 11.11 million, or just under 37% for his opponent, Chief Olu Falai. And in some ways, the defeated candidate's reaction wasn't that surprising either. No previous Nigerian presidential election has ended with the loser conceding defeat. Chief Falai maintains that the vote was corrupt and could take his case to Nigeria's Court of Appeal, a process that could take up months and possibly provoke public protests. The election itself, however, wasn't marred by violence, and although international observers did note some instances of ballot fraud, they're satisfied that it wasn't enough to affect the overall outcome of the election.
And this news just in, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter has questioned the results of the election. Mr. Carter, who is part of the UN team monitoring the polls, said there was a wide disparity between the number of voters observed at the polling stations and the final result. Well, Serbs and ethnic Albanians have marked their first anniversary of all-out fighting, with even more violence that's left at least 3 dead. The clash has frightened over 2,000 people into hitting the road, but they didn't get far.
It was a bold move that sharply escalated tension in already bloodied Kosovo. Ethnic Albanian rebels ambushed a Serb police convoy, killing a senior officer and wounding 4 others. Angry Serb forces lost no time in hitting back with all they had. Earlier skirmishes had already left at least 2 Kosovo Liberation Army fighters dead. The clashes have cast new doubts on the prospects for success when negotiators from both sides resume peace talks in France come March the 15th. And observers have cause to fear even more violence ahead as ethnic Albanians mark the first anniversary of the conflict, remembering the 24 people killed by police when the Serbs first attacked exactly 1 year ago. The renewed fighting has this family and thousands more like them fleeing for their lives. But the more than 2,000 refugees who lined the road to the relative safety of neighboring Macedonia were refused right of passage. Border police said they don't have the right documents. So for now, they're stranded with no shelter in the line of fire.
Pope John Paul II gives the green light, putting Mother Teresa on the fast track to sainthood. Why the special dispensation? That story in a while. U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has started talks with Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji. They're expected to discuss the Chinese financial and economic systems. Mrs. Albright is in Beijing ahead of Mr. Zhu's scheduled visit to Washington in April. Earlier, during Mrs. Albright's talks with other Chinese leaders, human rights emerged once again as a contentious issue between the two sides. Our correspondent Maria Xia with this report from Beijing.
It's a perennial issue that won't go away, clouding ties between the two nations and clouding today's talks between Mrs. Albright and Chinese Foreign Minister Tang Jiaxuan, making it clear that the issue of human rights is of great concern to the U.S. Mrs. Albright said she deplored the arrests of dissidents as well as other human rights violations. In response, Foreign Minister Tang accused the U.S. of politicizing the issue of human rights and blamed anti-Chinese elements for trying to affect ties between the two sides. During her talks with Premier Zhu, Mrs. Albright is expected to raise the issue of China's 13-year bid to join the World Trade Organization. China wants to enter the WTO under the easier terms offered to developing nations. The U.S. and other Western nations say China's economy is too big and some sectors too advanced for that and should join as a developed nation. Maria Xiao, China NewsAsia in Beijing.
The health of Russian President Boris Yeltsin isn't looking good. Doctors say he'll have to stay in hospital for up to a week longer to complete treatment for a stomach ulcer. Mr. Yeltsin was hospitalized over the weekend after complaining he felt uncomfortable and weak. He's reported to be in a stable condition. Doctors have blamed the flare-up of the ulcer on the president's refusal to adhere to a strict regime to aid his recovery. Mr. Yeltsin was first hospitalized in January and had been ordered to reduce his workload. But he defied medical advice last month, traveling to Jordan for the funeral of King Hussein, and has actively involved himself in the political arena again since then. Pope John Paul II has granted special dispensation for Mother Teresa to be made a saint. Church rules call for 5 years to pass after a person dies before the long bureaucratic process for sainthood can begin. But with popular and persistent demands to make Mother Teresa a saint, the Pope gave the green light, putting her on the fast track to sainthood. This is the first time in recent memory that an exception is being made. Mother Teresa died in September 1997 at the age of 87 after a life spent nursing and comforting the poor and the outcasts in Calcutta. The launch of Channel NewsAsia has been described as a major milestone in broadcasting by Singapore's Information and the Arts Minister, George Yeo. Brigadier General Yeo, who launched it this morning, says the channel will help Singaporeans find a good balance between international and local sources of news and keep all better informed.
About 200 members of the media industry were at Raffles Place, Singapore, for a breakfast launch of the newest addition to broadcasting in the region. Channel NewsAsia aims to present an Asian viewpoint of what's happening around the world.
It will help to meet the growing demand for news in real time, presented from an Asian viewpoint, especially among professionals, managers, executives, and businessmen. With the region in the middle of a crisis, they want to be kept informed at all times. Channel NewsAsia will supplement the other international news channels and help to make Singapore a business center and a media hub.
18 hours of news and business information kicked off this morning after more than a year in preparation, and Channel NewsAsia will eventually broadcast to the region sometime next year, making it the first English language channel with its roots in Asia.
Motorcyclists will soon enjoy automated clearance at the Woodlands and Tuas immigration checkpoints. Singapore Immigration Controller Lu Cheng-Yang says trials for the system, which uses a smart card, will begin mid-year. The system had started at Singapore's Changi Airport in 1997 for frequent air travellers. It was extended to the land checkpoints for frequent travellers by bus since August last year. Singapore Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong left for a 5-day working visit to Australia tonight. The visit comes shortly after the Singapore-Australia Joint Ministerial Committee meeting in Singapore last week. A highlight of Mr. Goh's trip will be his speech at the Asia Society Australasia Centre. He's expected to speak on the impact of the financial crisis on the region and how countries like Singapore are trying to recover from it. And in a written judgment released today by the Singapore High Court, a revelation to what the country's defeated Workers' Party candidate Tang Liang Hong did in June 1996. Tang had transferred a large sum of money from his wife's account in Singapore to his own account in Johor. This he did a day after he gave an interview to a Hong Kong newspaper. Judge G.P. Selvin reasoned that Tang did this as he was troubled by what he said to the newspaper and expected a defamation action against him. So he emptied his account before he was sued with damages, as it subsequently happened. The judge cited the incident to explain his earlier decision in turning down an application by Tang's wife, Madam Teo Siew Ha, to lift a Mariva order against her. One of Singapore's major banks, OCBC, has reported a 27% tumble in full-year net profit to 429 million Sing dollars or 249 million US dollars. This was slightly better than analyst consensus estimate of a 31% decline. Interest income for Singapore's second biggest bank grew 23% to almost 4.2 billion Sing dollars. The bank's provisions for exposure to regional countries was increased to 938 million Sing, up 65% from the previous period. And now a look at markets around the world. Hello again. Australian researchers have made what they say is a significant breakthrough in gynecology. They've discovered the hormone that triggers childbirth and are now hoping that it'll lead them to find a way to prevent premature deliveries worldwide.
Babies like little Nicholas, born 16 weeks early and weighing only 600 grams, is just one of 50,000 premature births recorded each year. But that may soon be a thing of the past. Scientists from the Hunter Medical Research Institute recently discovered a hormone called CRH, which is made in the placenta and acts like a timer. After testing 1,500 pregnant women, they found that CRH works by setting off a chain reaction in both mother and baby's hormones, triggering labor.
And that would be the real excitement, to be able to change the time of delivery to a better time for the baby.
This medical breakthrough could prevent a lot of heartache, eliminating serious risks faced by a premature baby such as cerebral palsy, breathing problems and learning difficulties.
A hammerhead shark caught off Port Stephens in Australia has broken the record for the biggest catch. The shark is named for the shape of its head. It topped the scales at 358 kilograms, rewriting the old record of the previous catch by almost 100 kilograms. Local fisherman Tony Eastwood caught the fish measuring 4.1 meters during a fishing tournament, taking 45 minutes to reel in his catch. After weeks of frustrating delays, Switzerland's Bertrand Piccard has finally lifted off in his third round-the-world balloon attempt. The Breitling Orbiter 3 balloon, which at 55 meters is the same height as Italy's Tower Pisa, will head to southern France and then Spain. It hopes to reach Mauritania on Wednesday to pick up the fast jet stream winds meant to speed them around the world in a target of 16 days. Piccard and co-pilot Brian Jones are in the second balloon currently in the sky. Piccard's former partner Andy Elson is in a rival balloon that recently broke the endurance record set by the duo last year. And let's take a look now at the world of sports. We begin with football and the English Premier League. Champions Arsenal's hopes of retaining the title have suffered a blow after a 1-1 draw at Newcastle.
Arsenal travelled to St James's Park looking for a win to keep the pressure on league leaders Manchester United and Chelsea. The Gunners had good early control of the match, but it was Newcastle who almost went ahead in the 29th minute. Even Alan Shearer couldn't believe he didn't tuck that one away. That looked a costly mistake as the break approached and Arsenal took the lead through Nicholas Anelka. Newcastle found it hard going for most of the second half, but managed to contain the Arsenal attack. Then with 11 minutes left, a splendid individual effort by Dietmar Hamann brought the game even. 1-1, a bad result for the champions, who now find themselves 7 points adrift of the top. Golf now, and Jeff Maggott will no longer be remembered as the player who could never close the deal. Call him the comeback kid of the Match Play Championship. Actually, it was Andrew McGee who looked to have his hands on the trophy when he went 3 up in the match after 20 holes. But Maggott birdied the 3rd and 4th holes before McGee bogeyed the 5th to bring the scores level. The lead changed hands several times on the back 9 before Maggott birdied the 13th to level the scores, and that's how it finished after 36 holes.
And now a look at the weather forecast around the world. And here's a recap of the headlines. Israel has bombed guerrilla targets deep inside Lebanon in its most intensive attack on the country in 2 years. The bombings were in retaliation for the killing of 7 Israelis, including a high-ranking general by the Shiite Muslim group Hezbollah. In Nigeria, a first civilian president in 15 years. Former General Olusegun Obasanjo won a crushing victory over his opponent, former Finance Minister Olufalaye. But refusing to accept defeat, Mr. Falai has vowed to contest the result. And that's News World on this Monday. Thanks for joining. I'll see you again tomorrow.